Welcome back, everyone. Michael here with Offshore Citizen. Today I'm going to go through a topic that a client I was talking to yesterday mentioned to me. And this is the subject of how freedom varies in different countries and what you can expect in different parts of the world. And I think this has an important role to play in your values and where you would decide to move or live. Now, one of the things, so this person was from the US, so American, and didn't have a massive amount of experience with a bunch of different parts of the world, and was asking about what can I expect in Montenegro, what can I expect in Panama, what can I expect in a bunch of different places. And I think it comes down to a little bit of a conversation I was having with another client at lunch a few weeks ago, where he was kind of expressing some of the freedom that he likes in terms of the values of where he chooses to live. He lives in Dubai. Versus some other countries. He's from Europe, so his different experience in Europe. So I'm going to cover for you today a little bit of the types of freedom that I think exist and where you can best find those types of freedom, and therefore where you might most like to live, and maybe some of the elements that you haven't really considered in ways that you just might not think about, but might, once you start to reflect on it, become fairly important to you. So we're going to go through that today. If you haven't already, please smash the subscribe button, nail the notification bell. Really appreciate you subscribing and supporting our channel. If you like the videos, please check out some of the others. Please share them with your friends. And if you're interested at all in these subjects of where to move, how to set up your international structure, what is the best solution for you, both for your company or for you personally, as well as help with implementation of putting that all together, then please reach out to us. You can book a call with me, calendly.com/Michael-Rosmer, where you can check out our websites, offshorecitizen.net and offshorecapitalist.com. Okay, sounds good. So I'll start with this kind of stereotype, which is that the US is the land of the free, right? That's kind of how they pitched themselves. I think starting with the American Revolution, right, standing against a lot of what existed in UK, right? Prior to that, kind of the British colonialism. And I do find it kind of funny that if you go to in Washington, is it Washington D.C.? It might be at George Washington's property in West Virginia. But anyway, wherever it is, I was there about a year and a half ago, and I found it interesting. I took a picture of the fact that they have this sign that's showing about how they were upset. Like, the American Revolution literally happened because of taxes, right? And today, it is quite the opposite. So that's a little bit of a stark contrast from where things were in 1776, I guess, when the Revolutionary War took place, to today. So let's go through this a little bit. So this friend of mine made a comment that I thought was quite interesting. He said, "Look, I live in Dubai. In Dubai, what do we lack? We lack the freedom to protest, right? It's not a place where that's acceptable." He's like, "I don't care. I don't want the freedom to protest." It's like, the freedom that I like is the freedom to not report my finances. And this is something that I feel like is a little bit overlooked. So if we were to go the gamut of where is free, it's like, well, it depends on what freedom and who you are and what your circumstances are. So we're going to talk about that. There's freedom of speech. Now, if you're thinking about freedom of speech laws, okay, the laws protecting freedom of speech are strongest, arguably, in the US, Iceland, Norway. These three are probably top, okay? But on the flip side, you have kind of cancel culture and all this nonsense going on in the US that has become quite loud. So, does that undermine your freedom of speech? Well, I mean, it's not the legislative, legal from the government freedom of speech, but it does affect how a lot of people feel they can speak out and be open. And so, you have kind of this witch hunt culture going on in certain parts of the world, which is pretty terrible in my opinion. Anyway, so you've got that. The next thing that you have, certainly better than most places in the world, if you care about this freedom in the US, is right to bear arms, right? So freedom to bear arms, I mean, there's very few countries that compete. You can go to places like Bosnia, where they have a lot of arms and a lot of gun rights. And there's a variety of different other places in the world where, whether you have the gun rights or not, they have a lot of weapons, things like this. If that's something that is super important to you, if you're like, oh, hey, this is, what I need, then, hey, listen, those would be countries that would be good for you, right? If, on the other hand, that's not so important to you, well, you might feel like, hey, listen, I'm better off, I'm happier to have not having these mass shootings and living in, I don't know, Japan, right? Where you don't have those rules, but on the other hand, you have more safety. So, take your pick, right? Is the freedom to bear arms more important to you, or is the safety more important to you? Because these are quite contrasting factors. Not that arms necessarily correlate to violence; they don't intrinsically. But that being said, certainly the U.S. is the most dangerous developed country in the world. But has some of these other things, whereas Japan is the safest developed country in the world, and doesn't have those things. So take your pick, right? What else have we got? So again, we've got things like with respect to regulations, right? So where do you have regulations to a large extent? Well, often in some of the more developing world, it's much less regulated. I remember having this appreciation for Mexico, going there and finding that things weren't behind fences. So when I'm in places like Canada and the US, what's the concern? The concern is people are going to get sued because somebody goes up to a waterfall and falls off the cliff. It's like, okay, well, in some places we'll say, well, that was your fault because you shouldn't have been going close to the waterfall. In other places, they're going to put up fences and they're going to put up signs and they're going to say, don't go beyond this point and on and on. It might be dangerous. And they're going to label that, hey, listen, don't shower with your blow dryer, and heaven forbid that somebody might do that, and then there'd be a big lawsuit. And, this whole litigation culture, right? So for me, I prefer being in places like Thailand and Mexico from this standpoint, where I don't have to worry about that stuff, right? It's like, if I'm going to go and I'm going to hang out with, I don't know, tigers, and I have to understand there's a certain risk associated with that. Yeah, the business is going to do some things to protect you because they don't want to have a bad reputation, etc. But there's some risks, right? If I go to Zelha in Mexico and I go cliff jumping or something, could I hurt myself? Yeah, I could. Is that somebody else's fault? No, that's my fault. I'm prepared to take on that responsibility. So I would rather not be in an environment that's overly constrained that way. On the other hand, I think the flip side of it is rules are not necessarily bureaucracy. So what really bothers me is bureaucracy. This is something I'm super against. So let's use Singapore as an example. Singapore is things work very well in Singapore, right? Well, what's the deal in Singapore? In Singapore, you actually have quite strict rules, right? But the difference is they're streamlined rules. So if I was to compare the Singapore tax authority with the IRS, I'd way rather deal with the Singaporeans than I would with the IRS. Why? Is it that there's more, is it that the strictness is the issue? That, they're very lax in Singapore? No, they're not very lax in Singapore. The difference is that they're clear, they simplify things, they streamline things, they make things work for people, as opposed to you go through the IRS tax code and there's so many exceptions and variations and complications and poorly written laws and things that are unclear and on, that it's a nightmare to navigate. So it's stupid. I don't like that, right? Then we have things like, your privacy, right? So some of these places protect your privacy. So for example, again, we can kind of look at laws in Iceland, we can look at laws in Switzerland, places like that where they're more for privacy. Then there's other places that they don't do that. Now on the flip side, they can do this to the point where it's stupid. For example, the EU brought in GDPR a while back. Terrible thing, breaks the internet or ruins the internet. Stupid. And why do I think it's stupid? Because it doesn't really make you any safer, but on the flip side, it makes life for a whole bunch of people more annoying. So to give you some example of this, I had a client in Bulgaria who was working on getting some payment processing and needed to get some account statements. And the bank stopped issuing account statements because they were getting GDPR complaints about the privacy of the data. Like, are you kidding me? This is just like, anyway, so you have these kind of like out of control rules that you get in the EU and in some other places. So that's not so good. Then you might have things like freedom from corruption, right? So some parts of the world, corruption gives you freedom, right? If you are somebody who has connections and you're somebody who has money and things like this, a lot of the challenges that you would go through as, say, a normal person might not exist for you. But on the flip side, you have to worry about other stuff. So this was a big problem in Ukraine. Still is, but for quite a long time, this was an issue. I remember a friend of mine had a company that imported HVAC systems from Turkey into Ukraine and sold them. And he was talking about the difficulty of doing business because every time the shipment would get to the border, they'd have to negotiate with the guards to see, what people had to be paid and things like this, and it creates a lot of friction. So do you want that? I mean, some people are okay with it because there's some trade-off. Other people are not. So then you've got things like freedom of religion, right? So in some parts of the world, religion is, you don't have a lot of religious freedoms. In other places, how you express that religion is somewhat restricted, right? So different thing. Now, on the flip side, maybe you're in a place where you do have some freedom of religion, but there's kind of like a cultural kind of attack on it or something, right? There's some cultural pressure in one way or another. So all of those things I think are worth considering. Then you have different rights, like gay rights, rights for women, rights for whoever, right? Like there's all these different things that may affect your situation. Now, the thing that I want to kind of caution you is that it's worth going to these places, because a lot of places that you might think, okay, this is on paper, this is in my stereotype a certain way, you get there and you discover it's quite different. So anyway, that gives you a little bit of just a broad context for considering. Maybe for that last one, I'll just give an example here of Malaysia, right? So some people will come to me and they'll say, oh, hey, Malaysia's a Muslim country, and so this is a bad thing. Now, personally, I think Malaysia's great. I don't think there's issues at all. And interestingly, a lot of the rules that you might have problems with go back to the British colonial times, not to the modern times. But it's interesting that while it's 69% Muslim country, it's not Sharia law, right? So you have this different environment where, yeah, okay, it's Muslim. I'm here in Dubai, and it's Muslim, and in a lot of ways it's very free and expressive and a melting pot and mosaic or whatever you want to call it of different cultures, and it's perfectly fine. So people, I think, have some predispositions or prejudices about places before they visited there. So I would encourage you always to go there and see what's your actual experience on the ground, because it might be different than you think. So anyway, if you have some questions, some places in particular you'd like to ask about, or some type of freedom that I haven't mentioned, please put it in the comments below. Would love to hear from you. Would love to hear what stuff is most important to you. And I'm going to look forward to seeing you guys on the next video. If you haven't already, give it a like if you like the video. And yeah, I'm looking forward to talking to you guys very soon.